The rain hissed against the cobblestones of a Paris alley, cloaking the night in a veil of secrets. It was 1944, and a woman known only as Shadow stood frozen, her breath catching as the Gestapo's boots echoed closer, their flashlights slicing through the dark. A coded message, clutched in her trembling hand, held the key to an Allied victory, or her own betrayal. One wrong move, one whispered name, and history would bury her courage in silence. Who was she, this ghost who defied an empire, and what truth did she carry that the Nazis would kill to keep hidden? Welcome to a story of espionage, sacrifice, and secrets history tried to erase. If you're drawn to the shadows of the past, where bravery and betrayal collide, hit that like button and subscribe to join us in uncovering the dark, thoughtful corners of history. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, and step into a world where every whisper could be a weapon and every shadow hides a truth waiting to be told. The attic was a coffin of shadows, its air thick with the musk of damp wood and fear. Noor Inayat Khan, codename Madeline, crouched over her suitcase radio, her fingers trembling as they danced across the Morse key. The faint glow of a single candle flickered, casting jagged patterns on the peeling wallpaper of the Paris safe house. It was October 1943, and the city outside was a maze of Nazi checkpoints and whispered betrayals. Each tap of the key sent a pulse of hope to London, a coded lifeline for the resistance, but every second she lingered invited death. The Gestapo was close, too close. Their boots thumped on the stairs below, a relentless drumbeat growing louder, closer, splintering the silence. Noor's breath caught, her dark eyes fixed on the door. She whispered a single word, "Liberté," as if it could shield her from the storm about to break. The door shuddered under a heavy fist, and then silence. Had she escaped, or had the shadows finally claimed her? How did a poet, a mother, and a one-legged American become the Nazis' worst nightmare? This is the story of the women who waged a secret war in 1944, women who defied empires, betrayed expectations, and carried the weight of freedom on their shoulders. In the spring of 1944, Europe was a tinderbox, its cities scarred by war, and its people crushed under the Nazi heel. France, occupied since 1940, was a land of curfews and executions, where a wrong glance could mean a bullet. The Allies were planning their greatest gamble, D-Day, the invasion to liberate Western Europe. But victory hinged on a hidden war, fought not with tanks or bombs, but with whispers, codes, and courage. The Special Operations Executive, or SOE, was Britain's answer to this shadow conflict. Formed by Winston Churchill to set Europe ablaze, the SOE was a rogue outfit, a collection of spies, saboteurs, and misfits tasked with arming the French resistance and disrupting Nazi operations. It was a desperate mission, and in 1944 it demanded desperate measures. The SOE did the unthinkable. They recruited women. Women who, in a world that dismissed them as fragile, would become the sharpest blades in the Allied arsenal. These were no ordinary women. They were Virginia Hall, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, three souls bound by a shared defiance, each carrying scars and secrets that would shape the war's outcome. Virginia Hall was an American, a woman who should never have been in the fight. Born in Baltimore, she dreamed of diplomacy, but the U.S. State Department rejected her, citing her gender and the wooden leg she'd worn since a hunting accident in her 20s. They called her unfit. She called their bluff. Her prosthetic leg, nicknamed Cuthbert, was both a burden and a weapon, a constant reminder of her resilience. By 1944, Virginia, codename Marie, was already a legend in SOE circles. She had slipped into France in 1941, posing as a journalist, and built resistance networks under the Gestapo's nose. Her escape over the Pyrenees in 1942, a grueling trek through snow and ice, had made her a marked woman. The Nazis plastered her face on wanted posters, dubbing her the Limping Lady, offering a fortune for her capture. Yet she was back, driven by a fire that no rejection could douse, ready to risk it all again for a country that wasn't even hers. Noor Inayat Khan was a paradox, a gentle soul forged in violence. Born to an Indian Sufi mystic and an American mother, Noor grew up steeped in poetry and pacifism. Her delicate frame and soft voice belied a will of iron. By 1943, she was Madeline, an SOE wireless operator in Paris, the most dangerous job in the field. Wireless operators were the lifelines of the resistance, transmitting plans and coordinates to London, but their signals were beacons for the Gestapo's radio detection vans. Noor's faith guided her. She believed in nonviolence, yet chose to fight, her hands trembling as she learned to kill with a knife or a gun. Her poetry, scribbled in stolen moments, spoke of freedom and sacrifice, but in the field she was alone, a single spark in a city of shadows, knowing each transmission could be her last. Odette Sansom was a mother, her heart tethered to 3 young daughters left behind in London. A French-born British woman, codename Lise, she joined the SOE out of a fierce love for her homeland. Odette's beauty and charm were her cover, but beneath them lay a steely resolve. She'd landed in France in 1942, coordinating sabotage and arms drops in the south, her every move shadowed by the Gestapo. By 1943, Betrayal had landed her in Fresnes prison, but her spirit remained unbroken. In 1944, her network carried on her work, and her story, her refusal to crack under torture, became a beacon for those still fighting. Odette's sacrifice was personal. Every day she endured was a day her children waited, unsure if their mother would ever return. These women were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were daughters, sisters, dreamers, thrust into a war that demanded they become something else: spies, saboteurs, ghosts. The SOE's training camps in the British countryside were their crucible. They learned to fire Sten guns, to rig explosives, to snap a man's neck in silence. They mastered ciphers, memorizing codes that could mean life or death. Virginia, with her sharp mind, crafted disguises that turned Cuthbert into an asset, padding her leg to alter her gait, aging her face with makeup to become an old peasant woman. Noor, her fingers nimble from playing the vina, sent Morse code with a pianist's precision, even under pressure. Odette learned to charm and deceive, her smile disarming resistance fighters and Nazis alike. But the training wasn't just physical. It was a psychological gauntlet, stripping away fear and doubt, teaching them to live with the constant hum of paranoia. A wrong word, a missed signal, a glance too long, any could unravel everything. The SOE's decision to send women into France was a gamble born of necessity. Men were too easily conscripted or suspected. Women could slip through the cracks, their presence less likely to raise alarms. But the cost was staggering. The Gestapo hunted SOE agents relentlessly, their radio detection units scouring Paris, Lyon, and beyond. Capture meant torture, deportation, death. Yet Virginia, Noor, and Odette chose this path, knowing the odds. Their motivations were as varied as their lives. Virginia's defiance of a world that underestimated her, Noor's spiritual quest for justice, Odette's love for her children and country. Each carried a personal weight. Virginia's fear that Cuthbert would betray her limp, Noor's struggle to reconcile her pacifism with sabotage, Odette's ache for her daughter's voices. These were not abstract heroes. They were women who bled, doubted, and pressed on. As spring 1944 bloomed, the Allies' plans for D-Day took shape, and the SOE's mission grew urgent. The women prepared for their most dangerous assignments yet. Virginia was to land in Brittany, organizing arms drops to arm the resistance. Noor, already in Paris, was transmitting vital intelligence, her signals guiding Allied bombs. Odette's network, despite her capture, was poised to disrupt Nazi supply lines. The air was thick with tension, every moment laced with the threat of betrayal. The Gestapo's net was tightening, and double agents lurked within the resistance itself. One false move, one misplaced trust, and they'd be in the Gestapo's hands. As they packed their cyanide pills, small, bitter insurance against capture, the question hung heavy. Could they outwit the enemy, or would the shadows swallow them whole? The fog clung to the Brittany coast like a shroud, swallowing the faint hum of the motorboat as it sliced through the black waves. It was March 1944, and Virginia Hall, codenamed Marie, sat crouched in the bow, her breath shallow, her prosthetic leg aching against the damp wood. Disguised as an old peasant woman, her face weathered with makeup and her hair streaked with ash, she was no longer the American diplomat in waiting. She was a ghost, slipping back into a France that wanted her dead. The Gestapo's wanted posters still haunted the villages, her likeness plastered on every wall, the limping lady a prize worth a fortune. Yet, here she was, returning to the lion's den, driven by a defiance that burned hotter than fear. The boat rocked as it neared the shore, and the resistance contact, a grizzled fisherman named Marcel, whispered that the coast was crawling with German patrols. One wrong step, one flicker of suspicion, and the mission would end before it began. As the boat scraped sand, Virginia's heart thudded, not from the cold, but from the weight of what lay ahead, arming the resistance, disrupting the Nazis, paving the way for D-Day. The night swallowed her as she stepped ashore, but the question lingered. Could she outrun her own legend? In Paris, Noor Inayat Khan, codenamed Madeleine, moved through the crowded streets like a wisp of smoke. It was early 1944, and her work from the previous year, frantic transmissions sent under the Gestapo's nose, still echoed in the Allied war rooms, guiding bombs and bolstering resistance plans. Her suitcase radio, a bulky beast of wires and dials, was her lifeline and her curse. She carried it from safe house to safe house, her slight frame hunched under its weight, her dark eyes scanning for the telltale signs of betrayal. A lingering glance, a too-quiet cafe, the faint hum of a German radio detection van. Noor's cover was a seamstress, her delicate hands stitching dresses by day, but by night they tapped out Morse code, sending coordinates and warnings to London. Each transmission was a gamble, the signal a beacon that could draw the Gestapo like moths to a flame. She knew the risks. Her circuit, Prosper, had been shattered by arrests in 1943, yet she stayed, driven by a quiet faith that freedom was worth any price. In a stolen moment, she scribbled a poem in her notebook, words of longing for peace, clashing with the violence of her work. I am the spark in the dark, burning for those who cannot. The words were her anchor, but the loneliness gnawed at her, a constant reminder that she was alone in a city of enemies. Far to the south, Odette Sansom's legacy lived on through her network, even as she languished in Fresnes prison. Captured in 1943, betrayed by a double agent, she had faced the Gestapo's interrogators with a defiance that left them baffled. Her beauty and poise, once her greatest assets, were now a mask for her pain. In 1944, her resistance circuit in Cannes carried on her work, coordinating sabotage to cripple Nazi supply lines. Safe houses hummed with activity, fighters slipping through the night to collect arms drops or plant explosives. Odette's letters, smuggled out of prison, were laced with guilt. She wrote to her daughters, promising a reunion she feared would never come. "My darlings, I fight for you," she scrawled, her words trembling on the page. Her network's leader, a young Frenchman named Jean, whispered her name like a talisman, urging his fighters to honor Lisa's sacrifice. Every bridge they blew, every train they derailed was a testament to her courage, but also a reminder of the cost. The Nazis retaliated with executions, and Jean's heart sank with each civilian death, knowing Odette would carry that weight, even from her cell. Virginia's first days in Brittany were a dance with danger. She moved through villages as Madame Dubois, a hunched milkmaid with a weathered shawl and a basket of cheese. Her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, was padded to hide her limp, but every step was a test of endurance. She used dead drops to pass messages, slips of paper tucked into milk cans or buried under stones in churchyards. Her OSS reports, later declassified, detailed her early missions, organizing arms drops in moonless fields, whispering plans to resistance leaders in barns reeking of hay and fear. One night, she met a maquisard named Pierre, a wiry teenager with eyes too old for his years. He spoke of German convoys moving toward Normandy, their tanks rumbling through the night. Virginia's coded messages to London, sent via a trusted courier, carried Pierre's intelligence, each word a step toward D-Day. But paranoia shadowed her every move. The villagers were kind but wary, their smiles tight with suspicion. Had someone seen her slip a note? Did the baker's lingering stare mean he was an informant? The Gestapo's reach was long, and Virginia knew her face was burned into their memory. She slept with a cyanide pill under her tongue, ready to swallow if the knock came. Noor's life in Paris was a tightrope walk over a pit of knives. Her radio transmissions were the pulse of the resistance, relaying troop movements and sabotage plans. She worked in fleeting bursts, setting up her radio in attics or abandoned flats, her antenna strung across rooftops like a spider's web. The Gestapo's detection vans prowled the streets, their equipment homing in on her signals. She had to move constantly, her cover as a seamstress barely holding under scrutiny. One morning, a cafe owner named Claire, a resistance contact, warned her of a new threat, a traitor in their midst, someone feeding names to the Germans. Noor's heart raced as she scanned the faces around her. Were Claire's eyes too nervous, her warning too convenient? She wrote in her diary that night, her words raw with isolation. I trust no one, yet I must trust someone to survive. The poem she penned afterward was a cry for freedom, its lines heavy with the weight of her double life. My soul is a dove, but my hands wield fire. The contradiction tore at her, a pacifist forced to enable destruction, but she pressed on, knowing her signals were the Allies' eyes in France. In the south, Odette's network pushed harder, their sabotage growing bolder. Jean's team derailed a supply train bound for the Atlantic Wall, the explosion lighting up the night sky. The Nazis responded with fury, rounding up villagers and executing 10 for every fighter caught. Jean's resolve wavered, his hands shaking as he buried a comrade, but Odette's words, passed through smuggled notes, kept him going. Hold fast, for France. In Fresnes, Odette faced her own battles. The Gestapo dragged her to interrogations, their questions sharp as blades. They wanted names, locations, codes. She gave them lies, her voice steady, despite the bruises blooming across her skin. Her interrogator, a cold-eyed officer named Bleicher, leaned close, promising freedom for cooperation. Odette smiled, her charm a weapon, and fed him false leads, buying time for her network. But the cost was steep. Each session left her weaker, her thoughts drifting to her daughters' faces, their laughter a distant echo. She whispered their names in the dark, a prayer against despair. Virginia's missions grew more daring. She coordinated a drop of Sten guns and explosives in a field near Quimper, the parachutes drifting like ghosts under the stars. Pierre and his maquisards hauled the crates into hiding, their breaths fogging in the cold. Virginia's OSS reports noted the success, but also the risks. German patrols were doubling, and a traitor had been spotted in a nearby village. She met Pierre in a church, the air thick with incense and suspicion. He whispered of a new resistance recruit, a man named André, whose stories didn't add up. Virginia's instincts screamed danger. André's knowledge of their plans was too precise, his arrival too convenient. She slipped a coded message into a dead drop, warning London of a potential leak. The reply, scratched on a scrap of paper, was chilling. Trust no one. Paranoia tightened its grip, and Virginia began to see threats in every shadow. Was Pierre loyal, or was he playing her? The cyanide pill felt heavier in her pocket, a grim reminder of the stakes. Noor's world was shrinking, the Gestapo closing in. She moved to a new safe house, a cramped attic above a butcher's shop, the stench of blood seeping through the floorboards. Her transmissions were faster now, her fingers flying over the Morse key, but the danger was palpable. Claire, the cafe owner, had stopped meeting her, her silence ominous. Noor's diary entries grew terse, her words laced with fear. I feel them watching, waiting. She clung to her poetry, scribbling lines about a free France, but the act felt futile against the weight of her isolation. One night, as she sent a critical message about German defenses near Calais, the signal faltered, static crackling through her headset. Her heart stopped. Was it a glitch, or had the Gestapo's vans locked onto her? She scanned the street below, shadows moving in the lamplight. A truck's engine growled in the distance, too close, too deliberate. Noor's fingers hesitated over the key, her poem unfinished, her fate hanging on a single, unanswered question. Was this the end, or could she slip away one more time? The knock came at midnight, sharp and deliberate, shattering the fragile quiet of the Lyon safe house. Virginia Hall froze, her hand on the coded message she'd been drafting, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. It was April 1944, and the Gestapo's shadow loomed larger than ever, their patrols scouring the countryside for the limping lady. She slipped the paper into her sleeve, her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, creaking as she moved to the window. Below, the street was a pool of darkness, but the glint of a German helmet betrayed their presence. They were here, hunting her, and someone had led them to her door. The betrayal cut deeper than fear. Had it been Andre, the new recruit with his too smooth stories, or someone closer, someone she'd trusted with her life? Virginia's mind raced, piecing together the whispers of doubt that had plagued her for weeks. The knock came again, louder, insistent, and she knew time was running out. In that moment, the war was no longer just about sabotaging the Nazis. It was about surviving the enemy within. The women of the SOE, Virginia, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, were fighting not only the Germans, but a web of deceit spun by their own allies, a web that threatened to strangle their mission before D-Day could dawn. In Paris, Noor Inayat Khan's world was unraveling. Her radio, still warm from her last transmission, sat silent in the butcher's attic, its wires a tangle of secrets. The static that had interrupted her signal the night before lingered in her mind like a warning. She'd sent critical intelligence, German troop movements near Calais, vital for the Allies' deception plans, but the crackle in her headset felt like a noose tightening. Her circuit, Prosper, was a ghost of its former self, gutted by arrests in 1943, and now, in 1944, she operated alone, a solitary spark in a city of spies. The cafe owner, Claire, had vanished, her silence a scream of suspicion. Noor's diary, tucked beneath a floorboard, bore the weight of her fear. The air is heavy with treachery, she wrote, her pen shaking. I see eyes in every crowd, but whose? She clung to her poetry, scribbling lines about a free France, but the words felt hollow against the reality of her isolation. The Gestapo's radio detection vans were relentless, their hum a constant threat. And now, with Claire gone, Noor wondered if she'd been sold out. She moved to a new safe house, a damp garret above a bakery, her radio heavier with each step. Every transmission was a defiance, a refusal to let her circuit die, but also a beacon that could end her life. Her pacifist heart wrestled with the violence her signals enabled, bombs, ambushes, deaths, yet she typed on, her fingers steady, her soul torn. Far south, in Frayne prison, Odette Sansom faced a different kind of war. Captured in 1943 after a double agent's betrayal, she sat in a cell that reeked of mildew and despair, her body bruised from the Gestapo's interrogations. By 1944, she had endured 14 sessions, each a brutal dance of questions and pain. Her interrogator, Hugo Bleicher, was a predator in a tailored suit, his voice smooth as he offered freedom for names. Odette's smile was her shield, her lies her sword. She fed him tales of fake networks, false drop zones, her words weaving a maze that kept her circuit alive. I know nothing, she told him, her voice steady even as her wrists bled from the cuffs. Her loyalty was a fire that burned through the pain, but it came at a cost. In stolen moments, she scratched letters to her daughters on scraps of paper, smuggled out by a sympathetic guard. My loves, I am with you always, she wrote, her her heart breaking with each word. Her network in Caen, led by Jean, carried on her work, blowing bridges and derailing trains, but the Nazis' reprisals were merciless. For every sabotage, villagers were shot, their blood staining Odette's conscience. Jean's messages, passed through underground channels, spoke of her courage. "Lise is our strength," he told his fighters. But Odette, shivering in her cell, felt only the weight of her absence. The betrayal that haunted them all had a name: Henri Dericourt. A charming French pilot turned SOE operative, he was the architect of their air operations, coordinating parachute drops and agent landings. But Dericourt was a double agent, his loyalty bought by the Gestapo. Declassified MI5 files, uncovered years later, revealed the scale of his treachery. He'd leaked drop zones and safe house locations, leading to dozens of arrests. In 1944, his shadow fell over every mission, his coded messages to London laced with lies. Virginia had sensed it in Brittany, where André's arrival coincided with too many near misses. She'd confronted Pierre, her teenage maquisard, in a rain-soaked barn, her voice low. "André knows too much," she said, her eyes searching his. Pierre swore André was clean, but the doubt lingered, a poison in their ranks. Virginia countered with her own techniques, embedding coded phrases in her messages to detect duress, words like sunrise or river that signaled safety or betrayal. Her latest dead drop, a note hidden in a cracked wall, warned London of a mole. The reply was a single line: "Suspect everyone." The paranoia was suffocating, but Virginia moved on, her missions too critical to pause. She organized a drop of explosives near Brest, the crates thudding into a field under cover of darkness. But as she slipped away, a German patrol swept through, their dogs barking too close. She adjusted Cuthbert's padding, altering her gait to mimic an old woman's shuffle, and vanished into the night, her heart pounding with the question, who had tipped them off? Noor's defiance was her strength and her undoing. She knew her circuit was compromised, yet she stayed, her radio the last thread, connecting the resistance to London. Her transmissions in early 1944 were gold, details of German fortifications, supply routes, and troop morale that shaped Allied plans for D-Day. But the Gestapo's radio game was in full swing, a sinister ploy where captured agents' radios were used to send false messages. Noor had been taught to spot the signs, missing security checks, odd phrasing, but the pressure was relentless. She worked in fleeting bursts, her antenna strung across rooftops, her ears straining for the hum of detection vans. One night, in a garret thick with the smell of yeast, she sent a message about a panzer division near Amiens. The reply from London was garbled, missing the usual code word. Noor's stomach twisted. Was it a mistake, or had her radio been compromised? She wrote in her diary, her words sharp with dread, "The net closes, but I cannot run." Her poetry, once a refuge, became a lament. "My wings are clipped, yet I must fly." She moved again to a safe house above a cobbler's shop, but the air was heavy with betrayal. Claire's absence gnawed at her, and a new contact, a man named Paul, seemed too eager, his questions too pointed. Noor's instincts screamed to flee, but her duty held her fast, her signals the lifeline of a dying network. In Frayne, Odette's interrogations grew crueler. Bleicher leaned closer, his breath hot on her face, promising her daughter's safety if she talked. "Give me one name, Lise," he said, his voice a velvet trap. Odette's laugh was brittle, her defiance unshaken. "You'll get nothing but stories," she replied, her mind racing to protect Jean and the others. She invented a fictional circuit, feeding Bleicher just enough to keep him chasing shadows. But the torture took its toll. Her nails were torn, her ribs cracked, her body a map of pain. In her cell, she clung to memories of her daughters, their giggles a shield against despair. A smuggled note from Jean reached her, hidden in a loaf of bread. "Your fire burns in us." Her network's sabotage was relentless, disrupting Nazi rail lines vital to the Atlantic Wall. But each explosion brought reprisals, and Odette's heart ached for the villagers caught in the crossfire. She whispered their names in the dark, a litany of guilt and resolve, knowing her silence was their only protection. Virginia's evasion in Lyon was a masterclass in deception. The Gestapo sweep came without warning, their boots pounding through the streets as she hid in a baker's cellar. She'd heard rumors of Dericourt's treachery, whispers from resistance fighters who'd seen his meetings with German officers. Her OSS reports, later declassified, noted the chaos, entire circuits collapsing, agents vanishing into camps. Virginia countered with cunning, leaving false trails, notes with fake rendezvous points, whispered plans meant to be overheard. She used Cuthbert to her advantage, limping heavily in public to throw off trackers, then moving nimbly in the shadows. One night, she met Pierre in a churchyard, the air thick with mist. "Andre's gone," Pierre said, his voice tight. "Caught talking to a German." Virginia's blood ran cold. Had Andre betrayed them? Or was he a scapegoat for Dericourt's larger game? She sent a coded message to London, embedding a duress signal. "Moonlight fades." The reply confirmed her fears. Dericourt was suspected, but proof was elusive. Virginia pressed on, organizing a sabotage mission to blow a bridge near Lyon, but the Gestapo was one step behind, their patrols too precise, their raids too frequent. Noor's final days in Paris were a descent into paranoia. She moved every night, her radio a heavy burden, her contacts dwindling. Paul, the new recruit, pressed her for details. Drop zones, codes, names. His smile was too easy, his questions too sharp. Noor's diary captured her turmoil. "I am a stranger in my own world, trusting only my heart." She wrote a poem that night, its lines a cry against the darkness. "The stars are silent, but I sing for them." Her transmissions grew desperate, each signal a race against the Gestapo's vans. On a cold April night, she set up her radio in a new safe house, a cramped room above a tailor's shop. The message was critical, details of a German airfield vital for D-Day planning. She tapped the key, her fingers steady despite the fear. Halfway through, the signal cut out, the room plunging into silence. Footsteps echoed below, heavy and deliberate. The door rattled, voices barking in German. Noor's hand hovered over her cyanide pill, her breath shallow. Her poem unfinished. Had a traitor sold her out, or had her own defiance sealed her fate? The answer hung in the air, as sharp and unforgiving as the Gestapo's knock. The explosion ripped through the night, a fireball clawing at the stars as the railway bridge buckled, its steel groaning under the weight of Virginia Hall's defiance. It was May 1944, and the Lyon countryside trembled with the aftershocks of her latest sabotage, a meticulously planned strike to choke Nazi supply lines. The resistance fighters who planted the charges vanished into the shadows, their faces grim with the knowledge that retribution would follow. Virginia, codename Marie, stood in a barn a mile away, her prosthetic leg aching from the day's trek, her mind racing with the cost of her orders. The bridge was a lifeline for German reinforcements headed to Normandy, and its destruction was a knife in the Reich's heart. But the Nazis would answer with blood. Civilian villages nearby would burn, their people lined up against walls, and Virginia's heart twisted at the thought. She'd seen the wanted posters with her face, the Gestapo's promise of gold for the limping lady, but the real weight was the lives her missions claimed, innocent lives caught in the crossfire of her war. As she scribbled a coded message to London, her hand shook, not from fear, but from the question that haunted her. Was freedom worth this price? The women of the SOE, Virginia, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, were no longer just spies. They were architects of chaos, their every move shaping D-Day, their every choice a gamble with lives. In Paris, Noor Inayat Khan's legacy lived on through her signals, sent in the desperate months of 1943 before her capture. Her intelligence, painstakingly tapped out under the Gestapo's shadow, had mapped German defenses along the coast, pinpointing bunkers and artillery that would face the Allied invasion. By 1944, her messages, preserved in SOE archives, were guiding planners in London, feeding the deception of Operation Fortitude, which convinced the Nazis that Calais, not Normandy, was the target. Noor's words, once whispered in poetry, now roared in the war rooms, her sacrifice a silent force behind the greatest invasion in history. But in her final days, as she sat in a Gestapo cell, she knew none of this. Her diary, later recovered, spoke of her last moments of freedom. "I sent the truth, but it cost me everything." Her pacifist soul had wrestled with the destruction her signals enabled, bombs that leveled towns, ambushes that left bodies in the dust, but she'd chosen to fight, her faith in freedom stronger than her doubts. The Gestapo had tried to break her, their questions relentless, but Noor's silence was her rebellion, her lips sealed even as her body weakened. Her final poem, scratched on a cell wall, was a whisper of defiance. "The cage holds my body, but my soul soars free." In Frayne's prison, Odette Sansom clung to life, her body battered but her spirit unyielding. Her capture in 1943, the result of a traitor's whisper, had not silenced her influence. Her network in Cannes, led by Jean, carried her torch, their sabotage missions in 1944 striking at the heart of Nazi logistics. Jean's fighters derailed trains and cut telegraph lines, each act a tribute to Lise, whose letters from prison urged them on. "Fight for the dawn," she wrote, her words smuggled out in a guard's pocket, stained with her blood. Odette's interrogations were a crucible, each session with Hugo Bleicher a battle of wits. He offered her freedom, her daughter's safety, if she'd name her comrades. "You waste your breath," she told him, her voice steady despite the pain in her ribs. She spun tales of fake safe houses, her lies buying time for Jean's team to strike again. But the reprisals haunted her, villages razed, children orphaned. In her cell, she traced her daughters' names on the wall, their memory her only shield against despair. Jean's latest message, hidden in a loaf of bread, spoke of a train derailment that stopped a panzer division. "For Lise," he wrote, and Odette wept, knowing the cost of her legacy. Virginia's work in Lyon was a high-wire act, each mission a step closer to D-Day and a step deeper into danger. Her OSS reports, later declassified, detailed her orchestration of arms drops across Brittany and Lyon, crates of Sten guns and plastic explosives parachuting into fields under the cover of night. She met resistance fighters in barns and churchyards, their faces etched with fear and resolve. Pierre, her teenage maquisard, was her eyes and ears, his reports of German movements vital to her plans. But the shadow of betrayal clung to every meeting. The double agent Henri Dericourt's treachery had left scars, drop zones compromised, agents vanished, and Virginia's instincts screamed of another leak. A new resistance member, a woman named Elise, had joined her circuit, her knowledge of Nazi patrols unnervingly precise. Virginia tested her, slipping false details about a drop site, and when Elise's next report echoed those lies, the truth hit like a bullet. Elise was feeding the Gestapo. Virginia acted swiftly, arranging a fake rendezvous to expose her. In a rain-soaked alley, Pierre confronted Elise, her confession spilling out under his knife's edge. "They threatened my family," she sobbed, but Virginia's heart was stone. She sent Elise away, her fate left to the resistance's justice. The near betrayal was a warning, and Virginia tightened her security, using disinformation to mislead Nazi patrols, planting rumors of attacks far from her true targets. The stakes of Virginia's missions were staggering. Every bridge she blew, every train she derailed weakened the Atlantic Wall, clearing the path for D-Day. But the Nazis' reprisals were merciless. Villages burned, hostages shot. Her post-war reflections, recorded in OSS files, revealed her guilt. "I gave the orders, but the blood is on my hands." She wrestled with the moral cost, her nights haunted by the faces of the dead. One mission, a plan to sabotage a train carrying ammunition to Cherbourg, pushed her to the edge. She coordinated with Pierre's team, their plastic explosives, small, deadly bricks of destruction, rigged to the tracks. The plan was flawless, the charges set under cover of darkness, but a coded message from a courier stopped her cold. "Enemy knows," it read, the words scrawled in haste. Someone in her circuit had talked, and the Gestapo was waiting. Virginia's mind raced. Could she trust Pierre? Or was he the leak? She sent a counter message, ordering the team to stand down, but the reply was silence. The train rumbled closer, its whistle piercing the night, and Virginia stood frozen, her hand on her cyanide pill. The explosion came, a deafening roar that shook the earth, the train's cars twisting into a heap of fire and steel. But as the smoke cleared, German voices barked, their flashlights cutting through the dark. The traitor's warning had come too late, or had it been a trap all along? Could Virginia stop the mission before the Gestapo closed in, or was her own defiance leading her into the jaws of betrayal? The Gestapo's boots echoed through the Lyon alley, their shouts slicing through the pre-dawn mist like a blade. It was June 1944, and Virginia Hall, codenamed Marie, pressed herself against a damp wall, her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, throbbing as she held her breath. The train derailment had succeeded, its wreckage a blow to Nazi logistics, but the traitor's warning had brought the hunters too close. Her disguise, a tattered shawl and a peasant's stoop, had fooled the checkpoints. The checkpoint guards, but now, with dogs barking in the distance, her luck felt like a fraying thread. She'd slipped through their nets before, her face a ghost on their wanted posters, but this trap was tighter, the Gestapo's movements too precise. Someone in her circuit had betrayed her, and the weight of that truth was heavier than the cyanide pill in her pocket. As she edged toward the alley's end, a German voice barked an order too close, and Virginia's heart pounded with the question that drove her forward. Could she outrun the shadows, or was this the moment her war ended? The women of the SOE, Virginia, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, had pushed their defiance to the breaking point, their courage aflame in the dark, but the cost was a tide of blood and betrayal, threatening to drown their fight for D-Day. In Paris, Noor Inayat Khan's defiance had ended months earlier. In October 1943, when the Gestapo's knock shattered her safe-house door. Her capture was a wound that bled into 1944, her radio, once the lifeline of the Prosper Circuit, now a tool in the Gestapo's hands. They played their radio game with chilling precision, using her captured transmitter to send false messages to London, sowing chaos in the SOE's networks. Declassified files later revealed how close they came to derailing Allied plans, their fake signals mimicking Noor's cadence, missing only her coded security checks. In a Gestapo cell, Noor sat chained, her delicate frame bruised, but her spirit unbroken. Her interrogators, led by a cold-eyed officer named Kiefer, pressed her for names, codes, safe houses. "You'll save yourself pain," Kiefer said, his voice a velvet threat. Noor's silence was her answer, her dark eyes steady, even as her hands trembled. She'd written in her diary before her capture, words heavy with resolve, "I will not bend, though my body breaks." Her poetry, scratched on scraps of paper, was smuggled out by a fellow prisoner, each line a testament to her faith. "My chains are iron, but my heart is free." The Gestapo tried psychological warfare, isolating her, starving her, promising freedom for betrayal. But Noor's silence was a wall they couldn't breach. Her signals from 1943 still guided Allied planners in 1944, her sacrifice a silent pillar of D-Day. But in her cell, she knew only the cold and the questions. In Ravensbrück concentration camp, Odette Sansom fought a war of endurance, her body wasting under starvation and torture. Transferred from Frana in early 1944, she faced a hell of barbed wire and ash, where women were worked to death and the air stank of fear. Her interrogations continued, the SS guards more brutal than Bleicher, their fists and whips seeking the names of her Khan's network. Odette's defiance was her lifeline. She lied with a smile, spinning tales of non-existent agents, her charm disarming even the cruelest captors. "You'll get nothing true," she told a guard, her voice hoarse but steady. Her post-war memoir revealed her inner strength. In the camp's darkest moments, she closed her eyes and saw her daughters' faces, their laughter a beacon through the pain. "My girls, I live for you," she whispered in the night, her fingers tracing their names on the bunk's splintered wood. Survivor testimonies painted a grim picture. Women collapsed from hunger, their bodies carted away like refuse, yet Odette stood tall, her spirit a rallying cry for those around her. A fellow prisoner, a Polish woman named Maria, passed her a note. "Lise, you give us hope." Odette's network, led by Jean, struck relentlessly in 1944, their sabotage crippling Nazi rail lines, but each explosion brought reprisals, and Odette's heart ached for the villagers, paying the price. Her letters, smuggled out, urged Jean to fight on. For France, for freedom. Virginia's escape from Lyon was a desperate gamble. The Gestapo's trap had been a hair's breadth from closing, their dog sniffing too close to her hiding spot. She'd used her disguise skills, altering Cuthbert's padding to exaggerate her limp, posing as a frail grandmother to slip past a checkpoint. Her OSS reports, later declassified, detailed her evasion. A forged identity card, a whispered bribe to a farmer, a night spent in a hayloft as patrols scoured the village. But the betrayal stung. Someone had known her safe house, her plans. Pierre, her trusted maquisard, swore he'd rooted out the traitor Elise, but Virginia's instincts screamed of deeper rot. The Gestapo's radio game, fed by Noor's captured transmitter, was unraveling SOE networks, and Virginia countered with her own psychological warfare. She planted false messages in dead drops, suggesting a major attack near Dijon, knowing the Nazis would chase shadows. Her real mission was a bridge demolition in Lyon, its steel arches a vital link for German reinforcements. She met Pierre's team in a forest clearing, their faces pale under the moonlight, their hands clutching plastic explosives. "This will hurt them," Pierre said, his voice fierce. Virginia nodded, but her thoughts were with the villagers nearby, their lives at risk if the Nazis struck back. Her guilt, later confessed in OSS files, was a constant shadow. "I chose the war, but not the blood it spills." Noor's ordeal in Paris had ended in chains, but her defiance burned on. Transferred to Pforzheim prison in early 1944, she faced solitary confinement, her cell a concrete tomb. The Gestapo's psychological tactics intensified. They left her in darkness, fed her scraps, whispered promises of release if she'd talk. Kiefer's voice haunted her. "One name, Madeline, and you'll see the sun." Noor's response was silence, her mind retreating to her poetry, lines she could no longer write but held in her heart. "I am the light they cannot snuff." A fellow prisoner, a Frenchwoman named Yvonne, later recounted Noor's strength, her whispered encouragements through the cell wall. "Hold fast, we are not forgotten." Noor's 1943 signals, used in 1944, shaped D-Day's success, but her interrogators knew nothing of this. They sent false messages from her radio, mimicking her style, but London's analysts, trained to spot missing security checks, grew wary. The radio game nearly succeeded, sowing confusion in SOE plans, but Noor's silence ensured the Gestapo gained no real secrets. Her final act of defiance came in September 1944, when she was transferred to Dachau. As the executioner's gun pressed against her neck, she spoke one word, "Liberté," a cry that echoed through the testimony of a surviving prisoner, a final spark of her unyielding spirit. Odette's survival in Ravensbrück was a miracle of will. The camp's horrors, starvation, disease, executions, tested her beyond endurance. She was tortured for information, her body broken, but her lies unbroken. "I know only stories," she told an SS officer, her voice a thread of defiance. Her memoir described her introspection. In the freezing nights, she imagined her daughter's voices, their bedtime stories keeping her sane. "My loves, I will come home," she whispered, though doubt gnawed at her. Maria, her fellow prisoner, shared scraps of bread, their bond a flicker of humanity in the camp's brutality. Odette's network in Cannes pressed on, their sabotage vital to D-Day, but the reprisals weighed heavy. Jean's smuggled notes spoke of a bridge blown near Nice, stopping a German convoy, but also of 20 villagers shot in retaliation. Odette wept, her guilt a mirror to Virginia's, their sacrifices intertwined. Jean's words, hidden in a rag, reached her. "Lise, your courage carries us." Odette clung to that, her defiance aflame against the camp's darkness. Virginia's missions grew bolder, each strike a step toward D-Day. She organized an arms drop near Villefranche, the parachutes drifting like specters in the night. Pierre's team hauled the crates, their breaths fogging in the cold, but the Gestapo was closing in. The radio game, fueled by Noor's captured transmitter, had compromised other circuits, and Virginia's was next. She used every trick, forged papers, false trails, coded phrases, to stay ahead. One night, she met a new contact, a priest named Father Michel, who offered sanctuary in his church. His kindness felt genuine, but Virginia's paranoia was a constant hum. "Trust is a luxury," she told Pierre, her voice low. Her OSS reports noted the strain. "I see enemies in every face." The bridge demolition had succeeded, but the Gestapo's response was swift, their patrols flooding Lyon. Virginia fled to a new safe house, a crumbling farmhouse on the city's edge, but as she slipped inside, she heard tires crunching on gravel. German voices barked, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Her prosthetic leg slowed her. Cuthbert's weight a betrayal of its own. She crouched behind a barrel, her hand on her cyanide pill, her breath shallow. The door creaked open, and the question burned. Would her luck finally run out, or could she slip through the Gestapo's grasp one more time? The roar of Allied tanks thundered through the Normandy fields, a tide of steel and fire breaking the Nazi grip on France. It was August 1944, and the liberation had begun, sparked by D-Day's bloody dawn 2 months earlier. Virginia Hall, codename Marie, crouched in a ditch outside Lyon, her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, sinking into the mud as she watched the horizon glow with the promise of freedom. Her network had paved the way, their sabotage, bridges blown, trains derailed, clearing paths for the Allied advance. But the victory was bitter, laced with the names of those lost, friends whose faces haunted her sleepless nights. The Gestapo's trap in the farmhouse had been a near miss, her escape a breathless sprint through fields as dogs bayed behind her. Now, with Lyon on the cusp of liberation, the air crackled with hope and dread. The Nazis were retreating, but their cruelty burned brighter in defeat, and Virginia's work was far from done. Someone in her circuit still whispered to the enemy, and the weight of that betrayal pressed against her chest, heavier than the forged papers hidden in her coat. As she slipped into a safe house, the question gnawed at her. Could she keep her network alive long enough to see France free, or would the shadows claim her first? The women of the SOE, Virginia, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, had poured their souls into this war, their courage shaping the tide's turn, but the cost was a ledger of loss, each sacrifice a wound that would never fully heal. In the chaos of liberation, Virginia's network was a lifeline for the Allied push. Her OSS reports, later declassified, detailed her relentless pace, arms drops in the Rhone Valley, sabotage missions that crippled German retreats, coded messages guiding American paratroopers. She moved through Lyon's outskirts, her peasant disguise fraying, but holding, her limp exaggerated to throw off pursuers. Safe houses were her sanctuaries, crumbling farms and hidden cellars where resistance fighters whispered plans over flickering candles. One night, she met Pierre, her teenage maquisard, in a vineyard, his eyes hollow with grief. "They took Marcel," he said, his voice breaking. Marcel, the fisherman who'd brought Virginia ashore, had been shot, his name betrayed to the Gestapo. Virginia's heart sank, her guilt a familiar ache. Her post-war reflections confessed the toll. "I sent them to fight, knowing some would die." She countered betrayal with cunning, using forged identity cards, stamped with fake Vichy seals, to move freely, planting false intelligence about resistance attacks to mislead Nazi patrols. But the losses piled up, each name a scar, Marcel, a courier named Sophie, a saboteur called Luc. Virginia pressed on, her missions critical to the Allied advance, but the paranoia was relentless. Father Michel, the priest who'd offered sanctuary, now avoided her gaze, his silences too heavy. Was he the traitor, or was her fear turning allies into enemies? In Ravensbrück concentration camp, Odette Sansom teetered on the edge of survival, her body a shadow of itself. The camp was a nightmare of hunger and horror, where women collapsed under forced labor, their screams swallowed by the wind. Odette, codenamed Lisa, had been transferred from Fresnes in early 1944, her spirit battered but unbroken by months of torture. The SS guards, their faces carved with cruelty, dragged her to interrogations, demanding names of her Khan's network. "You're wasting your time," she told them, her voice a thread of defiance, her smile a weapon that unnerved them. Her post-war memoir revealed her lifeline, memories of her daughters, their laughter a shield against the camp's despair. "I see you in every star," she whispered, her fingers clutching a splintered bunk. A fellow prisoner, Maria, shared scraps of food, her whispered words a bond. "Lise, you keep us fighting." Odette's network, led by Jean, was afire in the south, their sabotage in 1944, rail lines cut, convoys ambushed, hastening the liberation. Jean's smuggled notes reached her, hidden in rags. "Your courage lights our way." But the reprisals haunted her. Villages burned, families torn apart. Odette's guilt mirrored Virginia's, their sacrifices a shared burden, their defiance a flame against the dark. Noor Inayat Khan's voice, though silenced, still echoed in the war's turning tide. Her 1943 transmissions, sent before her capture, had shaped Allied strategy, her intelligence on German defenses guiding D-Day's planners. Declassified SOE files confirmed her impact. Her signals exposed panzer positions, enabling the deception that kept Hitler's eyes on Calais. But Noor's fate was sealed in Dachau, her execution in September 1944, a brutal end to her defiance. A fellow prisoner, Yvonne, survived to recount her final moment. She stood tall, said liberté, and faced them without fear. Noor's poetry, smuggled from Pforzheim, was her legacy. Lines like, "My soul flies where chains cannot bind," a testament to her spirit. The Gestapo's radio game, using her captured transmitter, had nearly undone her work, but London's analysts, wary of missing security checks, limited the damage. Noor's silence under torture ensured the Nazis gained no real secrets, her sacrifice a cornerstone of the liberation. In 1944, as France broke free, her absence was a wound felt by those who knew her signals, her courage a ghost in the war rooms. Virginia's work grew frantic as the Allies advanced. She coordinated a final arms drop near Lyon, the crates heavy with explosives and hope. Pierre's team, now a ragged band of survivors, moved like specters, their sabotage slowing German retreats. But the Gestapo's reach was long, their reprisals swift. A village near Villefranche was razed, its people shot for aiding the resistance. Virginia's OSS reports captured her anguish. "I fight for freedom, but I bury the innocent." She countered with psychological warfare, spreading rumors of a Maquis uprising to draw Nazi forces away from Allied routes. Her safe house network was a lifeline, each hideout a gamble. Father Michel's church remained a refuge, but his guarded glances fed her paranoia. "I trust you," she told him, her voice steady but her hand on her knife. A coded message from London warned of a Gestapo mole, their identity unknown. Virginia's heart raced. Was it Pierre, Father Michel, or someone new? She moved to a new safe house, a barn on Lyon's edge, but the air was thick with danger. German patrols swept closer, their efficiency unnatural. She planted a false message, suggesting an attack on a distant bridge, hoping to lure them away. But as she slipped through the city, a courier's warning stopped her cold. "They know your next move." Odette's survival in Ravensbrück hung by a thread. The camp's commandant, Fritz Suren, had marked her for execution, believing her a key to breaking the resistance. Her interrogations were relentless, the SS demanding details of Jean's network. "I have no secrets," she lied, her body trembling from hunger. Maria's testimony, later shared, spoke of Odette's strength. "She gave us courage when we had none." Odette's mind clung to her daughters, their names a mantra against the pain. Jean's sabotage in Caen continued, his team blowing a fuel depot that crippled German tanks. But the cost was steep. 50 villagers executed, their deaths a weight Odette felt in her bones. A smuggled note from Jean reached her. "Lise, France is rising." She wept, her hope flickering but alive. As the Allies swept through France, Ravensbrück's guards grew desperate, their cruelty peaking. Søren summoned Odette one dawn, his eyes cold. "You're no use alive," he said, his gun raised. She stood tall, her voice steady. "Then you'll kill a ghost." At the last moment, a radio message from Berlin ordered her spared, Søren's whim or a trick to break her. As she stumbled back to her bunk, the question lingered. Would she survive to see freedom, or was this merely a pause in her torment? The church bell tolled over Paris, a mournful knell echoing through streets newly freed from Nazi boots. It was late August 1944, and France was rising, its people spilling into the boulevards with flags and tears. But for Virginia Hall, codename Marie, the liberation was a hollow victory, stained with the blood of those she'd lost. She stood in a Lyon safe house, her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert aching from weeks of flight, her hands clutching a coded message from London confirming the Allies' sweep through France. The Gestapo's grip was broken, but the traitor who'd haunted her network remained a ghost, their whispers silenced by the chaos of retreat. Virginia's heart carried the names of the fallen: Marcel, Sophie, Luc, comrades betrayed by Henri Dericourt's treachery, their sacrifices paving the path to this moment. As she burned her last forged identity card, the ashes curling like memories, a question lingered, sharp as a blade. What was the cost of this freedom, and what secrets lay buried in its shadows? The women of the SOE, Virginia, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, had shaped the tide of war, their courage a spark that lit the liberation. But the aftermath was a ledger of pain, their victories tempered by scars that would never fade. Virginia's work did not end with liberation. As Allied tanks rolled south, she joined the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's fledgling intelligence agency, her skills too vital to retire. Her OSS letters, later declassified, spoke of her final missions in 1944, guiding paratroopers, relaying German retreat patterns, dismantling what remained of her network to protect survivors. She moved through Lyon's chaos, her peasant disguise discarded, but paranoia clung to her like damp cloth. Father Michel, the priest who'd sheltered her, had vanished, his church empty, his loyalty unconfirmed. Was he a traitor, or another victim of the war's cruelty? Virginia's reports were terse, her words hiding the weight of loss. I outran them, but not the ghosts. She shunned fame, refusing interviews, her name absent from the victory parades. Her introspection, confided in a letter to a friend, was raw. I fought for freedom, but I buried my friends. The OSS offered her a desk in Washington, a chance to shape the agency that would become the CIA. But Virginia's heart was still in France, tethered to the fields where her comrades fell. She accepted the role, but her silence was her shield, her defiance now a private war against the memories that haunted her. In Ravensbrück, Odette Sansom's survival was a defiance of fate. The camp commandant's last-minute reprieve had spared her from the executioner's bullet, but the camp's horrors lingered in her bones. Starvation had hollowed her, torture had scarred her, yet her spirit held fast, anchored by the thought of her daughters. Her post-war interviews revealed her struggle. I lived for them, but I returned a stranger. Released in May 1945, as the war ended, she stumbled into a world transformed, her body frail but her resolve unbroken. She reunited with her daughters in London, their embraces a balm for her wounds, but the joy was laced with pain. Nightmares of Ravensbrück woke her screaming. The faces of lost prisoners, Maria, the Polish woman who'd shared her bread, etched in her mind. Odette's network in Cannes had helped secure the South, their sabotage crippling Nazi defenses. But the cost was staggering. Jean, her resistance leader, survived to tell her, "Lise, your name kept us fighting." Yet Odette carried the guilt of reprisals the villagers executed for her network's actions. Her George Cross ceremony in 1946 was a moment of pride, the medal gleaming as the king pinned it to her chest. But her interviews confessed the truth. "The honor is theirs, not mine." The applause faded, but the trauma lingered, a shadow she could never outrun. Noor Inayat Khan's death was a wound that time could not heal. Her execution at Dachau in September 1944, confirmed by survivor testimonies, was a brutal end to her radiant defiance. Yvonne, the Frenchwoman who'd shared her cell block, recounted her final word, liberté, a whisper that defied the gun's roar. Noor's 1943 signals, used in 1944, had been a cornerstone of D-Day, her intelligence shaping the Allied deception that misled Hitler. But her story was buried in secrecy, her name unspoken in the victory celebrations. Vera Atkins, the SOE's spy master, took it upon herself to uncover the truth. Her post-war investigations, detailed in declassified files, traced Noor's path from Paris to Dachau, piecing together testimonies from survivors and captured SS officers. Atkins sat with Yvonne in a London cafe, her voice trembling as she asked, "Did Madeleine suffer?" Yvonne's reply was a knife. She was brave to the end. Noor's poetry, smuggled from Pforzheim, reached Atkins, its lines a haunting legacy. "My soul is a star, burning where none can see." The Gestapo's radio game, using Noor's captured transmitter, had misled the Allies, delaying critical operations, but her silence under torture ensured no real secrets were lost. Atkins wept for her, vowing to honor the woman whose light had been extinguished too soon. The psychological warfare of the SOE's women left a complex legacy. The Gestapo's radio game, fed by captured agents like Noor, had sown chaos, but the Allies' vigilance, spotting missing security checks, limited its damage. Declassified SOE files revealed the women's impact. Virginia's sabotage cleared paths for D-Day. Odette's network disrupted Nazi logistics. Noor's signals shaped strategy. Yet the personal toll was immense. Virginia's OSS work was a continuation of her fight, but her letters hinted at a deeper wound. "I won the war, but lost the peace." She avoided the spotlight, her Distinguished Service Cross accepted quietly, her thoughts with the dead. Odette's trauma was a private battle, her smiles for her daughters masking nightmares. Atkins's investigations uncovered the full scope of Henri Dericourt's betrayal, confirmed by MI5 files in 1947. The charming pilot had sold drop zones and names to the Gestapo, his treachery costing dozens of lives. Atkins confronted him in Paris, her voice cold. "You broke us." Dericourt's shrug was a final betrayal, his trial inconclusive, his fate a shadow. The revelation shocked survivors, Virginia among them, who'd suspected but never proved his guilt. The wound of his deceit lingered, a reminder that trust was a casualty of war. As the post-war world rebuilt, the women's stories faded into secrecy. SOE files were locked away, their missions classified, their sacrifices unspoken. Virginia thrived in the OSS, her skills shaping the CIA, but she spoke little of France, her heart heavy with the names of the lost. Odette's George Cross was a public honor, but her private pain was a silent companion, her interviews raw with grief. "I survived, but part of me stayed in that camp." Noor's death was a hushed tragedy, her heroism known only to a few until Atkins's efforts brought her story to light. The women's courage had turned the tide, their defiance a spark that lit the liberation. But the cost was a ledger of loss. Friends betrayed, lives ended, souls scarred. In the 2000s, the declassification of SOE files began to unveil their truth, revealing missions and sacrifices long buried. Names like Marcel, Sophie, and Luc emerged, their stories pieced together by historians. But as the files opened, new questions arose. Whispers of other agents, other betrayals waiting in the shadows. What secrets were still hidden, locked in the archives or the hearts of those who survived? The Thames flowed quietly under London's grey sky, its waters carrying the weight of a city that had seen too much war. It was 2012, and a crowd gathered in Gordon Square, their breaths fogging in the autumn chill as a veil lifted from a bronze statue of Noor Inayat Khan, her serene face forever frozen in defiance. Her posthumous George Cross, awarded decades earlier, had been a whisper of recognition. But this moment, her likeness unveiled in the heart of London, was a shout, a belated cry for a heroine whose poetry and courage had shaped a war's end. The statue's plaque bore her final word, liberté, a spark from 1944 that still burned, but as the crowd clapped, the air held a question heavier than bronze. How many others like Noor, like Virginia Hall and Odette Sansom, lay forgotten in the shadows of history? Their stories, buried for decades in classified files, were only now emerging, their sacrifices a testament to a hidden war that turned the tide of freedom. The women of the SOE had not just fought Nazis, they had reshaped espionage, their legacy a beacon for those who dared to defy. Yet the secrets of their comrades, lost to betrayal and time, whispered one last challenge. Who else remained unsung, their courage waiting to be claimed? Virginia Hall's legacy was a quiet storm, her name rarely spoken in the halls of power she'd helped secure. After the war, she joined the CIA, her OSS work a blueprint for modern intelligence, but she shunned the spotlight, her Distinguished Service Cross accepted in a private ceremony in 1945. Her OSS letters, declassified in the 2000s, revealed her final thoughts on France. I left my heart in Lyon with those I could not save. She trained agents, crafted covert strategies, and built networks that echoed her SOE days, but her silence about her past was deliberate. Historians like M.R.D. Foote, in his studies of the SOE, called her a pioneer, her sabotage missions in 1944 shortening the war by crippling Nazi logistics. Yet Virginia's mind lingered on the fallen, Marcel, Sophie, Luc, whose names she carried like stones. She retired in 1966, her life a quiet one, her heroism known only to a few. A colleague, quoted in a CIA memoir, recalled her words, "The war never ends for those who fought it." Her legacy was not in medals, but in the agents she inspired, men and women who learned from her cunning, her defiance, her refusal to let Cuthbert define her limits. The secrecy that cloaked her story, enforced by SOE's classified files, had hidden her impact for decades, but as archives opened, her name emerged, a ghost no longer. Odette Sansom's survival was a triumph laced with pain. Her return to London in 1945, frail from Ravensbrück's horrors, was a reunion with her daughters that broke and mended her heart. Her George Cross, pinned in 1946, was a public honor, but her interviews, raw with emotion, revealed the private cost. I came back, but part of me stayed in that camp. Nightmares of SS whips and starving faces haunted her, yet she spoke at schools, her voice steady as she told of Lise, of Jean, of the resistance that freed France. Her network's sabotage in 1944, detailed in declassified SOE reports, had disrupted Nazi supply lines, hastening the Allied advance. M.R.D. Foote estimated the SOE's work, including Odette's, saved thousands of lives by shortening the war. Yet Odette's guilt was a shadow, villages burned, lives lost for her orders. She visited Maria, her fellow prisoner in Poland, their embrace a silent acknowledgement of shared survival. You were our light, Maria told her, tears falling. Odette's legacy was in her resilience, her story a lesson in courage for generations, but the secrecy of the SOE's files had buried her contributions, her pain, a private war fought long after the guns fell silent. Noor Inayat Khan's statue was a crack in that silence, a moment when the world paused to honor a poet who became a warrior. Her George Cross, awarded in 1949, was a nod to her 1943 signals that shaped D-Day, but the 2012 unveiling was a reckoning, her story no longer a footnote. Vera Atkins' investigations had brought Noor's fate to light, her poetry and defiance preserved in smuggled scraps. Historians like Catherine Atwood called her a trailblazer, her wireless work a lifeline for the resistance, her silence under torture a shield for her comrades. The Gestapo's radio game, using her captured transmitter, had faltered because of her refusal to break, ensuring the Allies' plans held firm. Atkins, in a 1950s interview, spoke of Noor's impact. She was our heart, our spark. Noor's legacy inspired modern spies, her courage a template for those navigating the shadows of espionage. Yet the secrecy that cloaked her story had kept her hidden, her family unaware of her fate until Atkins's relentless search. The statue's unveiling, attended by her relatives, was a tearful reclaiming, but it stirred a deeper question. How many others, like Noor, had their stories locked away, their sacrifices lost to time? The SOE's role in the war was monumental, its agents, men and women, shortening the conflict through sabotage and intelligence. M.R.D. Foot's research quantified their impact. Months shaved off the war, lives saved by disrupted Nazi plans. Virginia's bridge demolitions, Odette's network, Noor's signals were threads in a tapestry of victory, each act a defiance of tyranny. But the secrecy that protected their missions also erased them. SOE files sealed until the 2000s. The theme of hidden warfare defined their legacy, not just the fight against Nazis, but the fight to be remembered. Henri Dericourt's betrayal, confirmed by MI5 in 1947, was a wound that lingered, his treachery costing lives like Marcel's. Atkins's confrontation with him, her voice cold, "You broke us," was a moment of reckoning, but his elusive fate left questions unanswered. The declassified files, opened decades later, revealed more. Agents lost, missions compromised, yet the women's defiance held firm. Virginia's disinformation, Odette's lies, Noor's silence were acts of psychological warfare that outwitted the enemy, their legacy a blueprint for modern espionage. As the world moved on, the women's stories found new life. Virginia's CIA colleagues, trained in her methods, carried her cunning into the Cold War. Odette's speeches inspired young women to face their fears, her trauma a testament to resilience. Noor's statue became a pilgrimage site, her poetry read by those seeking courage. But the archives whispered of others, agents like Sophie, whose sabotage ended in a Gestapo cell, or Luke, whose name vanished with his life. The SOE's women had reshaped history, their courage a fire that burned through the darkest years, but the secrecy that shielded their missions had also buried their comrades. Historians, combing through declassified files, found fragments of these lost stories, each a spark waiting to be kindled. The call to honor the unsung was not just for Virginia, Odette, and Noor, but for the countless others whose defiance lay hidden, their sacrifices a debt unpaid. As the crowd dispersed from Noor's statue, the Thames flowed on, carrying the question that lingered in the air: how many other heroines remain forgotten, their stories lost to time, waiting for someone to speak their name? The wind whispered through the fields of Normandy, carrying the ghosts of 1944, where courage had burned brighter than the fires of war. It was a time when the world hung on the edge of a blade, and three women, Virginia Hall, Noor Inayat Khan, and Odette Sansom, had wielded their defiance like a weapon, carving paths to freedom through a landscape of betrayal and blood. Their story, once locked in the shadows of secrecy, now stood revealed, a testament to the unsung who shaped history's tide. Yet, as the echoes of their sacrifices lingered, a final question haunted the air, sharp and urgent. Who else had fought in silence, their names buried in the dust of forgotten files? The women of the SOE had not just defied Nazis, they had defied oblivion. their courage a call to uncover the hidden, to honor those whose stories still waited in the dark. Their war was over, but the fight to remember them was just beginning, a challenge that demanded voices to rise and speak for the lost. The declassified SOE files opened in the 2000s were a revelation, their pages peeling back the veil on a war fought in whispers. Virginia's sabotage, detailed in OSS reports, had crippled Nazi supply lines, her bridge demolitions and arms drops clearing the way for D-Day's success. Historians like M.R.D. Foote calculated her impact. Months shaved off the war, thousands of lives saved. Yet her letters, raw with grief, spoke of the cost. Comrades like Marcel and Sophie, betrayed by Henri Dericourt's treachery, their names etched in her memory. Virginia's work with the CIA carried her legacy forward, her methods shaping modern espionage, but she never spoke of her medals, her Distinguished Service Cross, a quiet honor. A colleague, quoted in a CIA archive, recalled her words, "The war was won, but the price was my heart." Her silence was her final act of defiance, a refusal to let fame cheapen the sacrifices of those she'd lost. The files revealed more than missions. They revealed her humanity, a woman who fought not for glory, but for freedom. Her guilt, a shadow that followed her to her last days. Odette Sansom's survival was a miracle forged in pain. Her return from Ravensbrück, detailed in her memoir, was a journey back to a world that could never understand her scars. Her George Cross, awarded in 1946, was a beacon of her courage, but her interviews laid bare the truth. "I came home, but the camp never left me." Her network's sabotage in 1944 had hastened the liberation, their explosions tearing through Nazi defenses, but the reprisals, villages burned, families shattered, haunted her. She visited Maria, her fellow prisoner, in Poland, their tears a shared language. "You saved us," Maria told her, her voice breaking. Odette's speeches to schoolchildren carried her story forward, her voice steady as she spoke of Lisa, of Jean, of the resistance. Yet her nightmares persisted, the faces of the fallen her constant companions. The SOE files, when opened, confirmed her impact. Her network's actions saved Allied lives, but Odette's legacy was her resilience, a testament to a mother who fought for her daughters and a nation, her pain a price paid in silence. Noor Inayat Khan's story, once buried, was a flame rekindled. Her 1943 signals, used in 1944, had shaped D-Day's deception, her intelligence a cornerstone of victory. Vera Atkins' investigations, detailed in Sarah Helm's A Life in Secrets, traced Noor's path from Paris to Dachau, her poetry a lifeline for those who mourned her. The 2012 unveiling of her statue in London was a moment of reckoning, her George Cross a belated crown for a poet-turned-warrior. Atkins, in a 1950s interview, spoke of Noor's light. "She was our soul, our sacrifice." The declassified files revealed the Gestapo's radio game, a cruel mimicry of Noor's signals, but her silence under torture ensured no secrets were lost. Her final poem, smuggled from Pforzheim, was a cry against the dark. "I am the light that burns eternal, though my body falls." Her legacy inspired modern spies, her courage a beacon for those navigating the shadows. Yet the files hinted at others, agents like Yvonne, whose testimonies preserved Noor's story, their own sacrifices unwritten, their names lost to time. The SOE's women had rewritten the rules of war, their courage a blueprint for espionage that echoed into the present. Foote's research estimated their work shortened the war by months, their sabotage and intelligence saving countless lives. But the secrecy that protected their missions had also erased them, their stories locked in vaults until historians and families demanded their release. The betrayal of Dericourt, confirmed by MI5, was a wound that lingered, his treachery a reminder of the fragility of trust. The files, when opened, were a call to action, a demand to seek out the stories of the unsung. Sarah Helm's A Life in Secrets traced Atkins's quest, her relentless search for lost agents, a model for those who followed. The archives held fragments of others: Sophie, Luke, countless names whose missions ended in silence. To honor them was to dig deeper, to read the files, to share their stories, to ensure their courage was not forgotten. The women's legacy was not just in their victories, but in their humanity, their doubts, their sacrifices, their refusal to bend. The call now was to remember, to uncover, to speak. The SOE files available in the National Archives were a treasure trove, their pages waiting for curious minds to explore. Biographies like Helms offered a window into the lives of Atkins, Noor, and their comrades, while historians like Catherine Atwood urged readers to seek out the hidden. The stories of Virginia, Odette, and Noor were not the end, but a beginning, a challenge to find the others, agents, couriers, saboteurs, whose names lay buried. To share their stories was to keep their fire alive, to comment on their courage, to spread their names like seeds. The war they fought was a hidden one, its battles waged in shadows, its heroes cloaked in silence. But their legacy demanded voices, demanded that the world listen. As the Thames flowed on, carrying the echoes of 1944, Noor's poetry offered a final word, a whisper from the past that lingered in the heart. I am the spark that lights the dawn, though none may see my flame. Who would carry that spark forward, and who would speak for the heroines still lost to time? The rain fell softly on London's Gordon Square, a gentle patter that seemed to mourn the silences of history. It was 2012, and Noor Inayat Khan's statue stood resolute, her bronze gaze fixed on a future that had only begun to reckon with her sacrifice. The word liberté carved at her feet was more than a memory. It was a challenge, a call to unearth the stories of those who, like Noor, Virginia Hall, and Odette Sansom, had fought in the shadows of 944 to free a continent. Their courage had turned the tide, their defiance a spark that lit the liberation. But the cost was a ledger of loss, their names nearly erased by decades of secrecy. As the crowd dispersed from the unveiling, their footsteps fading into the city's hum, a question hung heavy in the damp air. What other heroes lay buried, their sacrifices waiting to be claimed by those willing to listen? The women of the SOE had not just won a war, they had rewritten what it meant to fight. Their legacy a fire that demanded to be carried forward, a flame that burned for the unsung, whose stories still whispered in the dark. The declassified SOE files, opened in the 2000s, were a window into a world of hidden warfare, their pages revealing the full scope of the women's impact. Virginia Hall's missions, detailed in OSS reports, had dismantled Nazi logistics, her sabotage a linchpin of D-Day's success. Historians like M.R.D. Foote noted her work saved months of fighting, her bridge demolitions and arms drops paving the way for Allied tanks. Yet her letters, raw with grief, spoke of a personal war. I led them to victory, but also to graves. Her CIA career, built on her SOE cunning, shaped modern espionage, but she never sought fame. Her Distinguished Service Cross, a quiet honor. A colleague, quoted in a declassified memo, recalled her words, "The dead deserve the glory, not me." Virginia's legacy was in the agents she trained, the networks she inspired, but also in the questions she left unanswered. Names like Marcel and Sophie, betrayed by Henri Dericourt's treachery, their fates a shadow she could never outrun. The files hinted at others, couriers and saboteurs whose stories ended in Gestapo cells, their courage a debt unpaid by history. Odette Sansom's return from Ravensbrück was a triumph of will, but her victory was bittersweet. Her memoir captured the weight of her survival. I walked free, but the camp walked with me. Her George Cross, awarded in 1946, was a beacon for her network's sabotage, which had crippled Nazi supply lines in 1944. Foote's research credited her actions with hastening the liberation, saving thousands of lives. Yet Odette's heart carried the pain of reprisals. Villages burned, families lost. Her reunion with her daughters was a joy tempered by trauma. her nights haunted by Maria's face, the Polish prisoner who'd shared her bread. "You were our strength," Maria had told her in a tearful post-war meeting. Odette's speeches to schoolchildren, her voice steady despite the memories, carried her story forward, inspiring generations to face their fears. But the SOE's secrecy had buried her contributions, her pain a private battle fought in silence. The declassified files, when opened, were a vindication, revealing her network's impact, but also a reminder of the others, Jean's fighters, unnamed couriers, whose sacrifices lay hidden, their names waiting to be spoken. Noor Inayat Khan's legacy was a light that pierced the darkness. Her 1943 signals, used in 1944, had shaped D-Day's deception, her intelligence a cornerstone of victory. Vera Atkins' investigations, chronicled in Sarah Helm's A Life in Secrets, brought Noor's story to life, her poetry a testament to a poet-turned-warrior. Atkins, in a 1950s interview, spoke of her grief. "Madeline was our heart, lost too soon." Noor's George Cross, awarded in 1949, was a quiet honor, but the 2012 statue unveiling was a global reckoning, her family weeping as her name was reclaimed. The Gestapo's radio game, using her captured transmitter, had faltered because of her silence, her refusal to break under torture a shield for her comrades. Her final poem, smuggled from Pforzheim, was a cry for freedom. "My soul is a star, burning where none can see." Her legacy lived in modern Spies, her courage a blueprint for those navigating the shadows. Yet the files hinted at others, Yvonne, the prisoner who preserved Noor's story, and countless agents whose names vanished. The secrecy that protected the SOE had also erased them, their sacrifices a call to dig deeper, to uncover the truth. The legacy of these women was not just in their victories, but in their humanity, their doubts, their fears, their unbreakable will. Virginia's silence, Odette's trauma, Noor's poetry were not just stories of war, but stories of souls, women who defied expectations to become legends. Foote's research, backed by declassified files, estimated the SOE's work shortened the war by months, their sabotage and intelligence a tide that lifted the Allies. But the secrecy that cloaked their missions had buried their comrades, names like Luke and Sophie lost to betrayal and time. Dericourt's treachery, confirmed by MI5, was a wound that lingered, his betrayal a reminder that trust was a casualty of war. Atkins's quest to find her agents, detailed in Helm's book, was a model for remembrance, her tireless search a call to honor the unsung. The files were a treasure trove, their pages waiting for curious minds to explore, to piece together the stories of those who fought in silence. To read A Life in Secrets was to walk in Atkins's footsteps, to feel the weight of her mission. To visit the National Archives was to touch the past, to hold the names of the forgotten. The challenge now was to act to carry their fire forward. The stories of Virginia, Odette, and Noor were not the end, but a beginning, a call to seek out the others, agents, couriers, saboteurs, whose courage lay buried. To share their stories was to breathe life into their legacy, to ensure their sacrifices were not forgotten. Comment with the names of heroes you've uncovered, share tales of the unsung, let their courage inspire. Like this story, subscribe to Join the Search, to keep the flame alive. The war they fought was a hidden one, its battles waged in shadows, its heroes cloaked in silence. But their legacy demanded voices, demanded that we speak their names. As the rain fell on Noor's statue, her poetry offered a final whisper, a call to the heart. I am the spark that lights the dawn, though none may see my flame. Who will you honor, and whose story will you tell, to ensure the dawn never fades?